When Little House on the Prairie aired in the 1970s and 80s, audiences were captivated by the heartwarming family drama set on the American frontier. Among its most iconic couples were Laura Ingalls Wilder, played by Melissa Gilbert, and Almanzo Wilder, portrayed by Dean Butler. Their on-screen love story became a fan favorite, but off-screen, things weren't always as picture-perfect as the Prairie sunsets. For decades, Melissa Gilbert stayed mostly quiet about her real feelings toward her co-star, Dean Butler. But now, after years of speculation, she's finally breaking her silence. What she reveals will surprise fans who thought they knew the truth behind the wholesome series. Before Dean Butler ever entered the picture, Melissa Gilbert's life had already been shaped by fame, responsibility, and the weight of carrying an entire television series on her young shoulders. Born on May 8, 1964, in Los Angeles, Gilbert was destined to be in the spotlight. She began acting in commercials at just a few years old, eventually landing the role that would change her life forever, Laura Ingalls Wilder on Little House on the Prairie. When she was cast in 1974, Melissa was only 9 years old. Overnight, she became America's Half Pint, a nickname given to her by co-star Michael Landon, who played Charles Ingalls. The show wasn't just another television series, it was a cultural phenomenon that spanned nearly a decade. Audiences tuned in every week to watch the Ingalls family's trials and triumphs on the frontier, and Melissa was right at the center of it all. But while fans saw a cheerful, spunky young girl living out adventures in the prairie fields, Melissa was experiencing a very different reality off-camera. Growing up under the glare of Hollywood lights meant she had to mature quickly. Her childhood was spent balancing the pressures of scripts, filming schedules, and the expectations of millions of viewers who saw her as a role model. Unlike many kids, she couldn't simply go to school, make mistakes, and grow quietly. Every part of her journey was magnified under the public eye. By the late 1970s, as Melissa entered her teenage years, Little House was evolving. The producers began to shift the focus toward Laura's coming-of-age stories, including her eventual romance with Almanzo Wilder. This meant Melissa had to transition from playing the plucky half-pint into portraying a young woman experiencing first love, marriage, and adult responsibilities. For Melissa, who was still navigating her real-life adolescence, the shift was daunting. And then came Dean Butler. Cast as Almanzo in 1979, Butler was several years older and far more seasoned in both life and performance. While Melissa was still just a teenager, Dean was already in his 20s, bringing a mature presence to the role. To fans, this dynamic seemed perfect for Laura and Almanzo's love story. But behind the scenes, the gap in age and experience created a unique set of challenges for Melissa. Imagine being 15 or 16 years old and suddenly required to perform romantic scenes with a co-star who feels more like an adult than a peer. For Melissa, it was confusing and at times overwhelming. She was still growing into her own identity, yet the scripts demanded she embody a wife, a romantic partner, and eventually a mother. This disconnect between her real life and her character's arc weighed heavily on her. Despite her private discomfort, Melissa handled the transition with grace. She relied on her professionalism and the support of Michael Landon, who continued to mentor her throughout the series. At the same time, though, she couldn't ignore the strangeness of being pushed into storylines that didn't match where she was emotionally in real life. Her early years on the show prepared her to handle the pressure, but the arrival of Dean Butler marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where the lines between fiction and reality would blur uncomfortably. Fans adored the blossoming romance between Laura and Almanzo, but Melissa's own perspective remained far more complicated. Before Dean Butler, Melissa Gilbert was already a star carrying immense responsibility, but his addition to the cast forced her to navigate a level of maturity she wasn't fully ready for. It's here, in the years leading up to their on-screen romance, that the seeds of her later revelations were planted. Melissa was learning that Hollywood's version of growing up didn't always match her own timeline. and that playing a character in love was very different from being a young woman still figuring out who she was. When Dean Butler made his debut as Almanzo Wilder in Little House on the Prairie, it was clear that the producers were preparing the next big chapter in the Ingalls family saga. Fans had watched Melissa Gilbert's Laura grow from a wide-eyed little girl into a spirited young woman, and now they wanted to see her experience love, marriage, and the trials of adulthood. Butler, with his tall frame, charming presence, and gentle demeanor, seemed like the perfect choice to sweep Laura off her feet. On screen, the chemistry was undeniable. Viewers quickly fell in love with the pairing, and the courtship between Laura and Almanzo became one of the show's most talked-about storylines. The episodes depicting their romance, full of shy glances, nervous conversations, and eventually, tender moments, captured the hearts of millions. Fans rooted for them as if they were witnessing a real-life love story unfold. But behind the Prairie sets and the cameras, Melissa Gilbert was struggling with a very different reality. At the time of filming, she was still a teenager, barely out of childhood, while Dean Butler was in his mid-20s. To audiences, the pairing seemed sweet and natural. To Melissa, it often felt awkward and intimidating. She has since admitted, in interviews and memoirs, that filming romantic scenes with Butler left her feeling uncomfortable. The scripts required her to act out situations, like holding hands, exchanging kisses, or sharing intimate conversations, that she wasn't yet ready to experience in real life. Imagine being 16 years old and expected to portray a convincing love story with someone who, in your eyes, seemed more like an older brother or even a teacher. That was the reality for Melissa. The age gap wasn't the only factor complicating matters. Melissa's personal identity was still tied up in her image as half-pint. To her fans, she would always be the plucky little girl running barefoot through the fields. Suddenly, she was expected to transition into a woman in love. And that shift wasn't just a storyline, it was a transformation happening under the watchful eyes of millions of viewers. The pressure was immense. Dean Butler, for his part, handled the situation with professionalism and kindness. He was aware of Melissa's youth and did his best to make her feel comfortable on set. Their relationship was respectful, even if it was never particularly close off camera. While fans assumed that the sparks they saw on screen were reflective of a real connection, Melissa later clarified that this wasn't the case. There was no off-screen romance, no hidden affection. For her, the love story was strictly part of the job. Adding to the strain was the guidance, or at times the pressure, of Michael Landon. As the creator and driving force behind Little House on the Prairie, Landon wanted Laura and Almanzo's romance to be believable and compelling. He pushed Melissa to embrace the adult aspects of her role, but this sometimes left her feeling torn between her own comfort level and the demands of the show. While Landon meant to bring authenticity to the story, for Melissa, it often heightened the sense that she was playing a part far beyond her years. And yet, despite the internal conflict, Melissa rose to the occasion. The Laura-Almanzo relationship went on to become one of the most beloved story arcs in television history. Their wedding episode was a highlight of the series, drawing huge viewership and cementing their place as one of TV's most iconic couples. To the audience, the story was flawless, but for Melissa, every scene carried the weight of personal unease. Looking back now, she recognizes the importance of those episodes in shaping the legacy of Little House. But she has also been candid in admitting that her teenage self struggled with the reality of portraying adult romance on screen. The love story fans adored was, for her, a delicate balancing act between professionalism and discomfort, performance and reality. For decades after Little House on the Prairie ended, Melissa Gilbert kept her real feelings about Dean Butler and their on-screen romance mostly to herself. Fans continued to ask questions at conventions, interviews, and fan events. Was she really in love with him? Did their connection go beyond the script? Many wanted to believe that the tender moments they saw between Laura and Almanzo had roots in reality. Melissa, ever gracious, often gave vague or polite answers. She praised Dean's professionalism, thanked fans for their love of the storyline, and quickly shifted the conversation back to the show's legacy. But inside, she carried memories of the discomfort and awkwardness she felt during those years. It wasn't until much later in her life that she finally decided to speak openly about the truth. The turning point came with her memoirs, particularly Prairie, released in 2009. For the first time, Melissa provided an unfiltered account of her experience growing up on set. She detailed not only the pressures of fame, but also the reality of filming romantic scenes as a teenager with an older co-star. With striking honesty, she admitted how strange and intimidating the whole situation felt at the time. Melissa explained that while she respected Dean Butler as a colleague, their relationship was purely professional. There was no hidden romance, no secret crush, and no sparks flying off screen. In fact, she described her feelings as quite the opposite: awkwardness, nervousness, and even embarrassment when filming their love scenes. She admitted that she often felt like a young girl playing house rather than a woman genuinely experiencing love. This revelation surprised many fans who had long assumed that Melissa and Dean shared some kind of off-screen bond. For decades, the illusion had been so strong that it blurred the line between fiction and reality. But Melissa's candidness cut through the fantasy, showing that the on-screen magic was a product of acting, not genuine romance. Breaking her silence was more than just setting the record straight. It was about reclaiming her story. As a child star thrust into adult roles, Melissa often felt that her narrative was controlled by others, producers, directors, and even public expectations. By finally opening up, she was able to separate Melissa the actress from Laura the character, allowing audiences to see the difference between her real experiences and the scripted ones. In interviews following her memoir, Melissa also emphasized how grateful she was for Dean Butler's professionalism during those years. While she found the age gap daunting, she acknowledged that Butler was respectful and considerate toward her. He understood the sensitive nature of their scenes and treated her with care. In many ways, his behavior helped her endure a situation that might have been far more difficult with a less respectful co-star. Her honesty also shed light on the broader issue of child actors being forced into adult storylines before they're emotionally ready. Melissa's story resonated with many who recognized how often Hollywood has blurred those lines, asking teenagers to portray relationships or emotions they've never truly experienced. By speaking openly, she not only shared her truth but also contributed to an important conversation about protecting young actors. Fans, for the most part, received her revelations with understanding. While some were disappointed to learn that the Laura Almanzo romance wasn't fueled by real-life affection, most appreciated Melissa's honesty. They realized that what made those episodes so powerful wasn't a secret love affair, it was the talent and commitment of two actors creating something believable on screen. Breaking the silence gave Melissa freedom. It allowed her to honor the legacy of Little House, while also making peace with her own experience. No longer did she have to smile politely and dodge questions. She could finally tell her truth in her own words. Today, when Melissa Gilbert looks back on her years on Little House on the Prairie, she sees them with a mixture of gratitude, humility, and perspective. The experience was formative, shaping her career and her personal identity in profound ways. And while her feelings about Dean Butler and their on-screen romance were complicated at the time, her reflections now come from a place of maturity and peace. The relationship between Laura and Almanzo remains one of the most beloved aspects of the series. Their love story was beautifully crafted, filled with trials and triumphs that mirrored the challenges of real life. For millions of viewers, it represented hope, resilience, and the enduring power of love. Even decades later, fans still cherish Episodes like their wedding or the tender scenes where they built their lives together. Melissa acknowledges this legacy, understanding how much those moments meant to audiences. Yet she also wants fans to know the truth. What they witnessed on screen was a story, crafted, rehearsed, and performed. It was not her reality. The awkwardness she felt as a teenager playing out adult storylines was very real, but it does not diminish the authenticity of the emotions she conveyed as an actress. In fact, one could argue that her ability to deliver such convincing performances, despite her discomfort, is a testament to her skill and resilience. Melissa has often spoken about how grateful she is for Dean Butler's professionalism throughout their time together. While the age gap created challenges, she acknowledges that Butler treated her with kindness and respect. There was never any exploitation or disrespect, something that in Hollywood cannot always be taken for granted. This has allowed her years later to look back on their work together without bitterness. Instead, she sees it as a partnership that contributed to one of television's most enduring romances. In breaking her silence, Melissa also shed light on the unique struggles of child actors. She became a voice for the many young performers who are often thrust into roles beyond their years, forced to carry responsibilities that can feel overwhelming. By sharing her truth, she not only reclaimed her narrative but also helped audiences understand the pressures behind the scenes. Her story serves as a reminder that while the prairie fields and wooden cabins on screen looked idyllic, the reality of being a teenage actress in Hollywood was anything but simple. Now, in her 60s, Melissa embraces a different chapter of her life. She has stepped away from the hustle of Hollywood, focusing instead on family, advocacy, and creative pursuits that bring her joy. She often speaks about finding peace in simplicity, something that mirrors the very themes that made Little House so beloved in the first place. The Prairie may have been fictional, but its lessons of resilience, family, and honesty continue to resonate with her. Her reflections on Dean Butler, too, are part of this journey. She no longer views their on-screen romance through the lens of discomfort, but rather as an important part of her growth. It taught her about professionalism, boundaries, and the importance of owning her truth. By breaking her silence, she closed the chapter not with regret, but with clarity. In the end, Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler's on-screen love story will always remain iconic. For fans, Laura and Almanzo will forever symbolize one of television's great romances. For Melissa, however, that story is more layered, an intersection of professional challenges, personal growth, and eventual peace. And by finally speaking out, she has given audiences a rare gift, the real story behind the fiction, told not by producers or fans, but in her own voice. Melissa's honesty ensures that her legacy is not just tied to Half Pint or Laura Ingalls, but also to the strong, self-aware woman she became. Her truth adds depth to the nostalgia, reminding us that behind every cherished TV moment, there's a human story, complicated, imperfect, and ultimately inspiring.